Just tell a little bit about GitLab's story first. It's kind of central to what I want to talk about, and our history, I think, is a big part of that. So let's talk a little bit about that history. So DZ Dmitry, who originally wrote GitLab in 2011, is actually from the Ukraine. And the way Sid, our CEO, who you'll learn about next, tells the story is he had two problems. He had no running water, and he didn't have a tool that he could use to collaborate with his fellow developers at his job, and he solved the most important problem first and wrote GitLab. So then later on an unnamed orange website, Sid was in the Netherlands and saw GitLab's existence and thought, wow, an open source alternative to GitHub, this is a really cool idea. Like, there's 300 contributors. Like, why wouldn't we have the thing that we all use to write code be a thing that we can all contribute to? This is really smart. And he said, Dmitry, hey, I think I'm going to start GitLab.com. Is that cool? And Dmitry said, it's open source. What you want? And so Sid did. And then, again, more lore goes that in about 2013, Dmitry tweeted, I wish I could work on GitLab full time. And Sid called him and offered him a job, and Dmitry said yes. And the story goes that Sid went down to the Western Union in Amsterdam to wire some money to Dmitry to get it started. And the person at Western Union said, do you know this person? And he said, no. And they said, you didn't meet them on the internet, did you? So anyway, but it worked out. It worked out. And then another huge contribution came from a gentleman named Kamil, who was in Poland. We never heard of him, but he contributed what is now the main runner for GitLab CI, which is one of our foremost products. And so from the very beginning, we were kind of this very distributed nature. And in 2015, we went to Y Combinator, and no, I say we like I was there. I was not there. There was the typical Y Combinator experience, everyone living in a house together. Also a bus, the GitLab bus, which, if you look, has our old logo on it, which I don't know if any of you were around when GitLab had that logo, but there was a user at the end of Y Combinator that said that they had nightmares about that logo. So it's really bad UX to have your logo giving people nightmares, so change that one. And then we had our first office, right? Y Combinator says, well, you have to have an office, and that office shall be in San Francisco. So 1233 Howard Street, San Francisco was our first office, and you can see the team there. That was also our last office. And this is because people stopped showing up to work at the office. So in the corner there, I bet you can bet which one of these people is the salesperson. Oh, I love Hayden. Great. But he was driving in from Alameda, and he decided to stop driving in from Alameda because that's a crazy commute. And oddly enough, work kept getting done, right? And today, we've grown to where I have 1,200 coworkers at GitLab. And they're in 65 different countries. And we still have exactly 0 offices. And yes, exactly. And I'm really proud of this fact. Like, I love telling people about having colleagues all over the world. We have a map. This map is on our website, which shows you where everyone is. So it's all 6 occupied continents. There's nobody on Antarctica. And like I said, all over the world. When we added people in Greenland, I noticed, because it's like, or in Iceland, it popped up, and you see it there. And I do mean everywhere. So I have 2 colleagues on the islands here in Hawaii. And although I don't think there's anyone in Alaska yet, so Hawaii, you beat Alaska to the punch on this one. And so just to give yourself a little, that's kind of the background and the history of GitLab. And I'm just wondering, how many people have heard of GitLab before today? Awesome, good, fantastic. Well, I'm Brendan O'Leary. I'm a senior developer evangelist for GitLab. And I'm not going to talk a lot about GitLab, the software, today. I'm going to talk a lot more about GitLab, the company. Because as much as I believe in the product, I was a GitLab user before I was a GitLabber, I'm more interested in the impact that we can have on the way people work together with this distributed, all remote model. And so that's why I'm making the case for what I'm calling the asynchronous enterprise. And why is that? Well, technology excellence is clearly the new operational excellence in business. And the few tech hubs that exist in the world are really not sustainable as the only source of talent. But it's also massively complex to scale outside of those hubs unless you have a massive capital investment, right? Like, so how has GitLab made this happen without either of those? And I think the answer is a very simple one, and that answer is trust. But I'm gonna define that a lot more as we go through it. So first, what's the situation? Again, I think 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, Mark Andreessen said that software is eating the world. I would say it's eaten the world. More recently, still Mark Andreessen talked about cycle time compression being the most underestimated force in determining winners and losers in tech. And competitiveness of today's businesses depend on how fast they can have their teams deliver code, and which is to say how fast can they deliver value to their customers. So accelerating the rate of innovation in all industries has increased the competitiveness for those industries and increased the competitiveness for talent. And leaders are slowly coming around to see this to be true. And traditional tech hubs, like in Silicon Valley or in San Francisco or New York, are thought of as the center of these types of revolutions. And it is still true to some degree, but this latest data from Indeed shows us that the dominance is waning. If you look at the data over time, which I haven't graphed here, you can see that the dominance of these areas is starting to wane, and companies are required to seek talent outside of your traditional tech hubs. And I think remote is part of that solution. So being remote, right, that's what we believe in at GitLab. We are 100% remote. We don't have an office. That's part of the solution. But I think, and some folks will say distributed workforce, but I think there's a lot more to it than that, and that's what I want to talk about. So just as important as working asynchronously, right? So sometimes you'll find a company that may have remote workers, but talks a lot about the time zones, and really that doesn't get you the full benefit of remote because you want to be able to work asynchronous together. And working across those time zones allow you to then have a lot more cultural diversity and ideas and new perspectives. And includes different ways of working together, right? There's folks of us that will stand up on stage and talk to a group of 200 people, and folks that don't want to do that, right? Like we need all of those viewpoints and different ways of working together to be successful. And I think all of those things are what have enabled our kind of unprecedented growth. And then also, I like to caveat it with, even though it seems like we have it figured out, it's definitely a journey for us as well. And it's one that, given our values, you can watch, and we'll talk about that in a second. And so I think more boldly than just, let's work asynchronously, I think that remote work is the future of work. And I thought I was the first one to say it. No, I didn't think I was the first one to say it. But I noticed when I was flying over here, I rewatched the Steve Jobs movie with Michael Fassbender as Steve Jobs. Anybody seen that? Michael Fassbender, Aaron Sorkin, only a few people. Okay. An interesting portrayal of Steve Jobs. And it opens with a news interview of Arthur C. Clarke from 1974. And he says, they're in a room with a massive room-sized computer, and there's a reporter and his young son. And Arthur C. Clarke says, well, in 2001, when he's grown up, we'll be able to live anywhere. And we won't have to be stuck in cities. We'll still be able to interact with each other through computers. And so that's kind of a bold prediction in 1974, and makes me feel like I'm a little late to the game. But this is not without its complications, right? So there's a lot of challenges that come in scaling a business to this side. And there's cultural differences, there's countries, and you can talk to our legal department about how fun that is. And there's time zones, right? So time zones are the really hard thing. Time zones are so hard because asynchronous work is hard, right? Coordination with each other actually takes longer than asynchronous work. So the real question is, but will it scale? Which is the classic software question, right? How does one scale a distributed workforce without this capital investment? Because people don't have that kind of cash lying around. Well, GitLab is also not the only business to have looked at this. So Basecamp is another company focused on remote. And they have an interesting thing in their handbook. Both Basecamp and GitLab have our handbooks published publicly. I can't remember what theirs is licensed at. Ours is actually Creative Commons licensed. And they have a great statement in there that in order to work this way, there's as much to unlearn as there is to learn. And there's other companies that have done this as well. Automatic, the company behind WordPress, Envision. These folks are embracing remote, but there's a lot of things that you have to learn in order to make that work. The more direct way that we put it, and something that we always default to, is our mission that everyone can contribute. And everyone really means everyone. You don't have to be in the same place. And once you don't have that constraint of place, it opens up the world in ways that you wouldn't think otherwise. Without that constraint of place, our core team is right in our Slack, and that's on our Zoom calls, and it's just the way we work. Working with the wider community, with the open source community becomes a lot more natural because that's how open source works together. And we have a very clearly articulated set of values that we really stick to. And when I first read about GitLab, again, I had been a GitLab user, and I kind of thought, okay, this handbook, it's pretty good marketing. Come to find out, it's actually like 4,000 pages long, and it is exactly how we operate the business. Like if you want to figure out how our finance people calculate every metric in the company, it's there, because that's the only source of truth that exists. And so the same is true of our values, and we talk about them all the time. So that's collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, inclusion, iteration, and transparency. And I want to talk about how each of these enable us to scale this asynchronous enterprise. So this graph we'll see again, right? Iteration is a huge thing that we talk about. The ability to take small steps and constantly adjust scope to make the smallest step possible allows you to kind of skate to where the puck's going to be, to give a hockey analogy, which works really well in a Hawaiian crowd. But that's what it is, right? It reduces the need for coordination because the steps are a lot smaller, the decisions you're making, the changes you're making are a lot smaller. And how we do that is we focus on something we call the minimal viable change. So you hear a lot of folks talk about the MVP, a minimal viable product. We break it down further to say the minimally viable feature, and to break that down even further to say the minimally viable change. And this enables really fast iteration because once you're focused on that, you say, well, if this change is objectively better than it is today, ship it. So talk a lot about who's directly responsible for a decision, right? So we have not a lot of command and control, not a lot of run something up managers and then down another set of managers. Someone is the DRI for making a decision, and they're going to make that decision. And especially going to make that decision if it's a two-way door decision. So if it's a decision that's easily changed, then making that decision now is a lot better than waiting for someone on the other side of the globe to wake up to see if they agree with your decision. And then we open merge requests. So we manage the company through our handbook. It's in Git. We make merge requests to it. Other people call them pull requests, but you're requesting a Git merge. That's a different story. But anyway, we call merge requests. It's already pulled to the... No, sorry, I'm sorry. I'm off topic. Anyway. But that's how we can collaborate asynchronously, because when we want to change something, it's not a PowerPoint that then has to get approved and thought about and those things. We're actually changing how we're doing business through a merge request. And the second is transparency. So we're going to record everything by default. And we have to do this because we don't have the time to afford to train people in meetings. We've said this every year, and it's been true every year. So I started in October of 2017, and I was about 150, 160th. And now there's 1,200 of us in 2020. So the thing we've said at the beginning of every year, which sounded crazy, is At the end of this year, there'll be more people who have been here for less than a year than the entire rest of the company right now. And so that's massively a massive change. And without writing everything down and recording by default, you just wouldn't scale. And those are things that a lot of companies talk about wanting to do. Oh, we should write down decisions more often, right? Oh, we should be more transparent about how we're making those decisions. Well, when you are asynchronous and when you are all remote, you don't have the luxury to not do that. And the other thing is then the receiver can move a lot faster, have the best, most accurate, most recent version of the information, and get the message from the most reliable source. And that's where part of the talk for JSConf I came up with the title, because it sounds familiar, right? You want to have the receiver receive the information when they're ready, when it's done, and when it's most reliable, right? So just like we'd want to, have our functions be asynchronous, that's the same thing we do, but with our communication. And also efficiency. So this is another big key to what we focus on. So writing down promises, making sure that they're measurable goals, having a bias for action. So I talked a little bit about this, but yes, you should have a thoughtful decision process, but you should make the decision, and instead of being fearful about making mistakes, make the decision, make the mistake, and learn from it. And then again, responsibility over rigidity. We talked about this a little bit. We want to give people the responsibility to make the decision and then hold them accountable for that, right? The results, right? That's one of our values, is how we're going to be accountable. And we do that by hiring people that want that responsibility, and it works out a lot better than a lot of rules and approval processes to manage people with. So talked a little bit about the handbook, but that's where our writing down promises really start. So it is the single source of truth. The story I tell about that typically is, so it's a long story. You will have met me after this because I'm going to tell a story. And so once a year we get together somewhere in the world. Right? The money we save from the San Francisco office, we get together. And a week after I started, we were going to Crete, Greece. So I'd actually already bought a plane ticket for Crete before I started with the company. I bought my Mac because we didn't have an IT department back then. So like Monday, I was like, how do expenses work? Got like $5,000 on my credit card. Okay. So anyway, I went to Crete, and I met Sid there, our CEO, who you will remember is Dutch, which is important for the story. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to get in good with this guy because I loved the handbook. I had read the handbook. It convinced me to apply. Sid, hey, it's nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you. He's really tall, so it's more like, Sid, nice to meet you. And I said, oh, I really like the handbook. It's amazing. Da, da, da. I said, good. Now that you're here, what's written one way, but we do it the other way? I said, I don't know, but I can get back to you. He said, I expect you will. You can Slack me when you do. Flash forward to me in my hotel room the week after I started at GitLab in Greece, like frantically trying to find something that's wrong in the handbook for what little I know about the company. But that really instilled in me the fact that this is how we run the business. This is our source of truth for how we operate together. And then the other thing I always say to people is we communicate more about how we communicate with each other than any other company I've ever worked for. Right? So we have a huge communication guidelines. It's, again, handbook gets down there. One, everything's in draft. Right? There's no final version of everything. There's no proposals. Everything's always in draft and always subject to be changed. Next, everything starts with that merge request. So we talked about how the merge request that makes it really obvious what exactly you want to change is proposed and transparent for everyone to see. We use public channels, so obviously we do also use a lot of Slack, but we're very focused on public channels so that if you're talking about something and you need to bring someone else in, it's really quick to do that. It's not a group DM, which is like the worst UX ever, if anyone here works for Slack. Anyway, we say thanks. So we also have a public thanks channel where we're very intentional about thanking people because there is no, slap on the back in the office or high five. And then we have this very horrible term for using very specific terms, but Sid loves it, so, so we call it Masifu, And so it's mutually exclusive, collectively exhausted, few words, ubiquitous language. It's so that we can communicate more simply. But what it is, words mean something, and we need to all have a mutual understanding of those words. So when we say, in finance, when we say AR, we know what that means. Or ARR, we know what that means. Or if in engineering, we say, what is a senior engineer? When it comes to defining everything, you can find a definition for it in the handbook, and it's critical. And we try really hard not to have terms overlap. And again, all those things really add up to trust, right? And so this is about trusting each other and kind of having a common ground where trust can start. And building that trust, again, is not easy, right? It's not just you write it down and it's done, as much as you'd want it to be. You have to actually also invest in individual relationships and invest in group work relationships. And so we're just as intentional about informal communication as we are about formal communication. So we have video calls, a lot of Zooms happening. We have virtual coffee breaks so that you can actually, you're asked to spend some of your time socializing and talking about something outside of work, or maybe meeting someone from the other side of the world. And then the time in person is very important, right? So we want to focus that time in person on relationship building, not on work. So one, there's a travel stipend if you, I think it's $150, the handbook would tell you. But for every GitLabber, if you're going somewhere and you're going to meet a GitLab team member, you get $150 towards your travel for every team member you're going to meet. So there's 15 people in Amsterdam and you live in the US and you want to go to Amsterdam, you're going to get your flight paid for. We also focus a lot on local meetups. So there's a lot of loc_ channels in our Slack that have the different areas where we have concentrations of team members. And then contribute, which I talked about. So I've been to Crete, Greece, to Cape Town, South Africa, to New Orleans, and we're going to Prague in March. And this is critical and also not a bunch of executives doing PowerPoints, right? It's about forming relationships together. And when you build this trust, I think your employees and your coworkers aren't the only ones who benefit. So I didn't stage this Aloha call for the conference, although I definitely would have. But we had an Aloha call. You got to have Hawaiian shirt Friday somehow, even if you're remote, right? Yeah, exactly. But again, it's not just the company that benefits. It's a huge benefit for us as individuals, right? So there's a stat from an academic journal about if one spouse commutes longer than 45 minutes, that couple's 40% more likely to get divorced in the end. The remote work allows flexibility and time for spouses and kids and partners and where you need to live. And in fact, we write this down, of course. So in our values, there's a term that says family first, family and friends first, work second. And I experienced that myself. This is an actual thanks I sent to my thanks channel. So as I mentioned, I have 4 kids. My 4th I had while I was at GitLab. And the transition coming back was just amazing. I used to commute 45 minutes. And it would be like, okay, I'm going to work, good luck. Versus being downstairs is just unbelievable. To be able to step away and help for 10 minutes is just life-changing for a family or anybody that needs to take care of friends or loved ones. So thank you so much for your time. You can follow me at O'Leary Crew. And I'll post in the jobs channel too, so look out for that.